Hi there, Graham from Penguin Motors here. I'm leaning on Roger's RS2000 engine, which as you can see is equipped with IDFs. Came here for a rebuild. Apparently it was a little bit lackluster. Roger, the client, gave me a target horsepower of 150 horsepower. But as it was complete, I thought I'd sling it on a dyno, see what it actually had before we took it to bits. It made some numbers. Wasn't particularly fantastic, but it made some numbers, and then I tweaked it a little bit, and we actually found more power. At that point, Roger revised his power figure, so well done, Graham. Instead of him asking me to find 150 horsepower, he now set me a target of 160. So yeah, so that's it. So I'm now gonna briefly talk you through the rebuild, a few dyno runs, and in the later to come part 2 we will be testing it with the Group 1 airbox to see what effect that has. But as to date, I've never run it with the Group 1 airbox, so what I'm going to give you is as it came in, after I tweaked it, after the rebuild, up to the stage it is now. So here we are. Roger's RS2000 engine is on the dyno, equipped with its 44 IDFs, ready for a pre-rebuild dyno test. Specification is largely unknown. The bottom end is believed to be standard. The cylinder head has been modified. I did get to stick a finger down an inlet port and the head doesn't feel anything special. We know it's got a Burton 40-41 cam, and that's about it. Roger told me it's pretty tired, but it still ran okay. And as I've never had this opportunity to dyno test an engine before I rebuild it, I thought, great opportunity. So, you ready, boys? Should we make some noise? So, how'd it do? Well, it made a fairly uninspiring 136 horsepower and 128 pound-foot of torque. And I say fairly uninspiring because, to be honest, that's 32-36 twin choke territory. That's a fairly low power figure given a big pair of IDFs. But it is what it is. The air-fuel ratio looked slightly lean, so I thought that could just be a result of the fact that the engine was shipped down to me without its airbox. So obviously I ran it on the dyno without the airbox. So I thought, well, it won't hurt to try a bit more fueling. So I upped the main jet of size and we got a whole 1 more brake horsepower. Not very encouraging. So shall I just pull it off, or shall I see if there's any more in there? And I thought, well, let's put a timing light on. So I put a timing light on it to see where the ignition timing was actually set. Might have even been 30, I can't actually remember. No, I didn't write it down. Yeah, so certainly the ignition timing would have been in the ballpark, but I decided to do a little timing swing anyway. Couple of runs, inched it up by a couple of degrees at a time, and yeah, it responded really well. Power leapt up by 8 brake horsepower to 144, and we ended up with 134 pound-foot torque. So 8 brake horsepower, £6 foot from just a bit of tuning. Bit more timing, it went well. Moving on to the cylinder block. Here we got some water damage. It's obviously had water sitting in it sometimes. That's corrosion damage, which has largely been polished away by the rings going up and down. The next bore along, we've got some scuffing, which isn't great. Possibly the engine's been hot. And if I can turn you round and line you up, there you go. If I get my torch to work, you'll be able to see some scuffing in line with the pin. Now that's a little unusual. You don't normally see scuffing in line with a gudgeon pin. Could be a bent rod, or possibly it's just been very hot at some point. That's the usual reason. Moving on now, on quick check of deck height in relation to DDC. Give me an idea what to skim off the block at the same time as it's being bored. Moving on, we're on the valves now. Just checking maximum valve lift. It's a little bit short. We're showing 400 here, but the cam really ought to be giving 450. Similar story in the other valve. Not as critical as the exhaust, but we are short of valve lift, which is probably why the cam is not performing as you'd expect. Cam fullers, nothing remarkable except we've got an odd one, and we do have some wear in the odd one, and one of the others has got a strange wear mark on it, making me a bit nervous about putting them back. And here's the corresponding odd mark on the cam. And to be honest, I'm not going to put it back. It's short on valve lift, and I don't want to put new inserts in the head to get that right, so I'm going to try something else. Newman phase 4.5, that gives the valve lift that we would expect. In fact, the inlet side, it's given a little over, which is a nice Brucey bonus. I buretted the cylinder head, and at 49.5cc, it's only a fraction smaller than standard. So yeah, that explains it. Well, it explains the timing. Even despite having a Felpro head gasket, this engine had barely any more compression than standard, which would be why it so much liked more timing. We're going to use a normal gasket, skim the head, skim the block, give it around a true 10:1. The side on the combustion chamber side, I radiused the short turn a bit more and took a dislike to the steps from where the valve seats have been cut, and they've been cut fairly deeply. Simply put some dummy valves in and blended the nasty edges away. Looking at the top surface of the block, we've got freshly machined with 1mm oversized Marla pistons and a skim. In the bottom end, fairly standard, the crank has been ground. We've got resized rods with ALP bolts for security and a brand new old stock genuine Ford oil pump. Speaking of oil pumps, it's time to see if we can get some oil pressure up. So that was a brief run through of the major internal work needed. Sorry I wasn't actually able to film it for you, but to be honest, there's nothing that you haven't seen before. I didn't even, as I did with the last Pinto engine, I didn't actually time the cam. I just eyeballed TDC, eyeballed equal lift overlap on the cam, fitted up the vernier loose, and we did some power runs to work out what was optimum. And once I'd worked out what was optimum, I removed my vernier pulley and refitted Roger's own pulley because he had a peg type with different number of holes in the two halves of the pulley. But once I'd optimised the timing, you just put the engine back to TDC, mark the cam so you can be sure you know if it moves, pulling the belt off, put it back on, tension the belt, and look at the holes to see where the pin goes. And the one hole will line up and the pin goes in, and then you can do another power run to verify that the timing didn't slip, which is what I did. So all that remains for the moment is for me to show you what numbers we got after the rebuild and what numbers we got after a little bit of tickling. And then I'll give you the final pre-rebuild number and the post-rebuild number. And in part 2 we'll find out what it actually makes when it's installed in the car when we've got an airbox fitted. But the airbox isn't relevant today because I've not ever run it with the airbox, so our before and after figures are a true back-to-back reflection. Right, so that's it. First full power run done, and it's looking good. Lot of fuel standoff, but then if you watch the very first video, we had quite a bit anyway. I think that's largely a byproduct of the fact that these RDFs don't have any ram pipes or filtration, nothing whatsoever. And I think that causes a lot of standoff. But notwithstanding that, the AFR is about on target, and we've pulled out 155 brake horsepower and 141 pound-foot. And to put that into perspective, that means we are 19 brake horsepower up on when it first arrived and 13 pound-foot torque. So we're going in the right direction. Next is some cam timing swings. So we better make some more noise. Well, that was interesting and noisy. Yeah, it's a win-win. I think we've got a little bit less fuel standoff, but what we've got is another 5 horsepower, so we're now up to 160, and torque has gone up yet still more, so we're now at 148 pound-foot torque. So yeah, that's significant because that's 7 pound-foot torque, and the curve is a much nicer shape. So that's good. That's good. We're nearly there. What I'm now going to do is tinker with the timing because I haven't touched it, and I'm going to try some bigger chokes. Well, I think we've got a result there. The bigger chokes in themselves didn't actually have much effect on power, but they did, interestingly, reduce the standoff, and they also allowed me to reduce the main jet size, which is probably a good thing. A little tweak to the timing. I had been running at 30 degrees. It initially ran on, but it wants less than that now, which is understandable as it breathes better. So what did we do? Well, we pulled out 164 brake horsepower and 150 pound-foot torque. And we're in the rev range that the client wanted for, because when I asked him what he was going to rev it to, he went, 6 and a bit. So we've got that 164 at 6.2, 6.3, so that's well on the money. And we've definitely beaten his target. You know, in terms of power increase, we've actually gone up from our starting point 28 brake horsepower and 22 pound-foot torque, which, when you consider we haven't made any major changes, a refresh and a change of cam, and the cam I've put in is technically milder than the one I took out, so it's a win-win all round. Yeah, well happy. So I'm going to leave you with the graph, and watch out for part 2 when we see what it does when we put an airbox on it.